Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Go around the room and say our names. I'm George.
Marty. Stephen. Jerry. Gary.
Jim. Tony.
Jim. Bruce.
Jack.
Jan.
I'm Brad.
My name's Cass.
Grisha.
Welcome. And our speaker today is Steve Tierney. Steve is a Dharma transmitted teacher in the lineage of Suzuki Roshi. Stephen practices with meditation in recovery, crave Spirit Sanghai SFLGBTQA Sangha, Gay Buddhist Fellowship, and the Harford Street Zen Center. Stephen believes that we can find wisdom, compassion, and awakening wherever good people come together to practice healing, service, and joy. Dr. Tierney is a psychotherapist in private practice and Professor Emeritus in counseling psychology at CIIS. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to be here. Seems I often get invited to come during December. I'm not sure if that's because you've run out of other speakers, or perhaps I look a little bit like Santa Claus, or whatever it might be. But it's good to be here. So as I was thinking about what to talk about today, I was killing time and moving around doing other things, and so I was reading the list of the 10 best movies in the New York Times and the articles about that. And it's fascinating, first of all, because if any of you are like me, you find that in the old days I would have seen all 10 of those movies and have some opinions about them. And then in more recent years I would have seen some and been planning to see the rest of them. And increasingly now it's like I haven't heard of about half of them. And then when I read about them, it's like, yeah, and I won't be going to see those. But as I was looking at the list in the New York Times, it was very interesting. What they said was that the movie business is back. The business is up about, I forget the percentage, a large percentage from 2022. And they were trying to figure out why that was. And they said that it seemed to them, from the interviews they did with people coming out of theaters and surveys and so forth, that there were three things that brought people off their couches and back out into movie theaters, often jam-packed movie theaters, often with no hint that anybody was aware that there was a concern about any viruses that might be spread in those jam-packed rooms. And so what they said was that the three things that brought people back to the movie theaters were originality, freshness, and subverted expectations. And that's, originality and freshness is sort of an odd concept when you think about how many movies are John Wick 5 and Lord of the Rings 7 and, whatever the other movies are. It's like originality and freshness? Maybe not. But then if you look at the rest of that list, there was a number of things that seemed to be new and original. But I was interested in, as regarding the movies and regarding our lives and our spiritual practice, in the whole concept of subverted expectations. And so I really was thinking about how often, as I thought about it, do you actually hear somebody say, I went to the symphony or a movie or the ballet, and it wasn't at all what I was expecting, but I really enjoyed it. And, for some of us in the age group that some of us have found ourselves in, and lucky to still be here and mobile enough to either get to Zoom or get into this room, it's like sometimes we like the things that we like, I remember back when I lived on the East Coast, they had decided to put those, at the New York Metropolitan Opera, they were going to put those things where you could read the text of what was being sung. Well, they almost had a revolution in New York because the old queens, the opera queens, were just not having it. It's like, if you couldn't figure out what was being sung, you probably shouldn't be there. But there was all this stuff going on. And then they put them in, and new people came to the opera, and the opera was able to survive a downturn in attendance and revenues, and so everybody all of a sudden thought it was a great idea. It wasn't what we expected, but it seemed like a fantastic idea to folks at the time. And I was thinking about that in terms of what we do here in our spiritual practice. And for me personally, 28 years ago on Friday, on December 1st, I walked down the stairs of the Trinity Church in Boston and attended an AA meeting. My expectation was that I would learn to drink like a gentleman and be able to go back to my life in short order. And part of that was that I was involved in a lot of community activities at that point, and I knew the drinking had gotten messy, and if I wanted to be taken seriously and be a good example to the adolescents and young adults that I was working with, I couldn't be that messy. So my expectation was to learn some boundaries and as I say, drink like a gentleman. Well, it was 28 years on Friday of this week, and the expectation was not the outcome. The outcome is that I haven't had a drink or a drug in 28 years, and that's good. That was not what I was expecting. My expectation about drinking properly was subverted, and it's a good thing. And the way I got into that room in that church basement 28 years ago was that 2.5 years before that, I had gone to a retreat at Dai Buzatsu Zendo in New York, in upstate New York, that had been recommended to me. And my expectation when I went to that was the person that recommended it said, this will ease your suffering and allow you to be engaged in easing the suffering of others. And so I drove from Boston to upstate New York, expecting to, have some miracle. I don't know what I actually expected, but I expected it to be a couple of days and everything would be great. That now is a 30-year practice. And what I found in that retreat that weekend was something that I would later learn is Buddha nature or serenity, depending on where I'm at, and that the being quiet was possible. I was somebody who had an anxiety disorder, and I was a cocaine addict, so that combination, as you might guess, kept the brain moving very, very quickly all the time. And so at that retreat, I figured out it didn't happen immediately by any means, but I went expecting to ease suffering, which is I thought they would take away my suffering somehow. And what I learned instead was that there was a way in which I could actively engage body, heart, and mind and breath in easing suffering. And that in easing my own suffering, there was then a chance that I could be involved in easing the suffering of family and community and so forth. So I'm fascinated then, and without having the language, about this subverted expectations things. And I think in Buddhism we know it as not having fixed views, right? So we go to a retreat or we go to a lunch with a friend or home for Thanksgiving or the December holidays if you're having some. And our expectation is that things will go a certain way, and then we get there and they go some other way. And so I'm really fascinated by that. And so I did a little reading and research and so forth, and it turns out that while I had never heard the expression subverted expectations as a concept, that it's actually something they teach in cinema schools and teach to young folks who are, or whatever age they might be, learning to be authors and learning how to write and learning the process of criticism in the arts. And so what they mean by that is to behave or to write or to act contrary to an established belief or assumption for the purpose of being interesting. And I thought, no, I don't know about anybody else in this room, but when it comes to, have we ever done anything to sort of turn things a bit, to be more interesting, to have a little more pizzazz, to be more engaged in conversations and so forth. And then it goes on to say, I'm doing things in this fresh way to surprise your reader or your audience, but not in a way that feels contrived or unnatural. So that's when they're talking about subverted expectations. That's, you're supposed to be, lure people in and give them something in addition to or different than what they expected. I had the pleasure yesterday of going to a concert at the San Francisco Jazz Center for a group called Pink Martini, who I really like, and they did a tremendous concert. The woman that sings, I think her name is China Ford, and she's a fantastic singer, and she sang some Christmas songs, some Hanukkah songs, songs in Arabic, songs in French, songs, and I thought, wow, and the band was outstanding. And as we were walking out, we heard multiple people say, oh, I didn't know it was a holiday concert. Oh, I wasn't ready for that. It's just like 2 hours of this fabulous concert with these people really working hard, and it's like, it's not what I was expecting. And then happily, the people that they were with said, yeah, that woman can really sing. Say, oh yeah, she can. That was good. Yeah, I got the range, and she sings in all those different languages, and so it took just that little bit of time to have that subverted expectation. It's like they thought they were going to some sophisticated San Francisco jazz concert, and they were very whatever, and instead they got a holiday concert. And many people that I was listening to were like, no, didn't want holidays, it's too soon. And other people said, yeah, but the voice. So I think this subverted expectation thing really speaks to me because of the idea that we have in Buddhism about no fixed views. It's one of our basic practices that, through koan studies and through actually sitting meditation, we have this opportunity to say, what is it I'm attached to? What are these thoughts that I'm really attached to? I looked at an article in the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, and it says we should hold no fixed views, right or wrong, or even views about the path. The Buddha refused to take a position, it says, on questions of truth, because there is no way of knowing if the assertions about truth correspond to the way things actually are. And so that's when we sit in meditation, it allows us to arouse mindful awareness to say, whatever it is we were taught, whatever it is someone told us, we have the opportunity to take a look at that from a fresh perspective of where we are right now in life. What is reality presenting to us in this very moment? And so I think about a lot of the people I know in our community and others who arrived as young adolescents, teenagers, adults, and were told that we were broken or damaged or defective or sinful or psychiatric diagnosis or illegal. And people taught us that. And so then suddenly we believed them, and we became the best little in this group, boys in America, and tried to be the smartest one around, or the most, how many of us organized all the activities at our high school or college because, I'm going to be contributing, I'm going to do that because, I may be secretly gay back in those days, or not so secretly gay now, but I'm going to do this thing. And what a relief it is when we get here and figure out, oh no, nobody, if you remember the story of the Dalai Lama was at a group of psychologists, and he said to them, what's the biggest problem in America? And they said, low self-esteem. And he turned to his translator and said, what did they say? And the translator told him what he had said, and he giggled. That wonderful giggle of his. He said, how can that be? Low self-esteem. You are Buddha. You have Buddha nature. How could you not? If you don't think well of yourself, then that means you don't think well of the Buddha or each other. And he said, so you have to, He said, the most important thing that I remember is he said, someone taught you that. Someone taught you that, and they were wrong. So relearn, reprogram yourself to know that Buddha nature means that we have the capacity for healing and health, for taking care of ourselves and each other, and that was really important. So what he said, what the Buddha has taught us about this fixed views is that fixed views are only good if they're giving us guidance that's skillful. Not right or wrong, not good or bad, but is it skillful? Does it help you end your own suffering and then model that behavior for others, help others to end their suffering? And if it doesn't, then don't pay any attention to it. And you all know that there's many examples of where the Buddha said, here are the sutras and here are my teachings. And if they work, use them. And if they don't work, don't use them. Famously talking about the sutras, he compared it to a raft that you might ride if you're trying to get from one side to the other, to awakening, to liberation. And you would ride on the raft, and very good. He said, but how silly would it be if you picked that raft up and carried it across the dry land from there on? You send the raft back for someone else. So don't get attached, he said, to those views. And so for me, that was really useful when I first came to Buddhist practice, because I was hearing a lot of rules about how you enter a room, how you bow, how many hours a day you have to sit, what clothes you should wear when you're sitting. In some lineages, there's a conversation about having a somber face when you sit. And so none of that made any sense to me. And it sounded like the hell and brimstones of the churches I had passed through on the way to get here. And so I wasn't at all interested in those views. And so my expectations were that I would be able to stay here and to do that. And then I read some things that I'll share some with you today. One was in a book by Darlene Cohen called Turning Suffering Inside Out. She quotes a Japanese ancestor, Iku Sojan, who said, "Pain and bliss, love and hate are like your body and its shadow. Cold and warm, joy and anger, you and your condition. Delight in singing verse could be a road to hell, but at Hell's Gate you might find peach blossoms and plum blossoms." So I really was fascinated by that. It's this guy who wrote it. The original ancestor was Iku Sojan. So I looked him up to see what he was about, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard of him. It was sort of obscure, but he was a young monk who taught mostly children, worked with kids, and he was a delight. The children loved him because he was mischievous and often broke the rules, and often was asking the abbot or the teacher on a particular day a question that would stump the abbot, or disobeying what the abbot said. So the kids loved him. Then later, of course, as Buddhism would have it, he went on to become an abbot himself. And he's mostly famous because he was somebody who taught that our Buddhist practice had to include the totality of life, had to include everything that we were. And this was in the 1300s. And he suggested that enlightenment was deepened by participating in love and sex, including lovers, prostitutes, and an interesting concept called monastic homosexuality. You can just think about that for the day, what that meant. But he was somebody who he was very much impressed with the idea of the unity of opposites. So there could be these teachings, the precepts that we take or the precepts that we study. So there could be those teachings, and then there could be the realities of life. And so other teachers have done the same thing. Suzuki Roshi, the founder of San Francisco Zen Center, when teaching about the Sanghai, which some of you know about, he used the same kind of language at teaching about that document. In light there is darkness, but don't take it as darkness. In the dark there is light, but don't take it as light. Light and dark oppose one another like the front and back foot in walking. Each of the myriad things has its merit, expressed according to function and usefulness. And so in the Sanghai, this ancient document, what they're telling us, again, is there are things that we're going to teach you about how to sit and how to arouse mindful awareness and how to deal with impermanence and non-duality. And if they're useful to you, use them, engage with them, and then model them for other people. And if they're useful in your work with other people, keep talking about them and keep living them and practicing them. But you have a responsibility that if they're not helping you ease your own suffering, if they're just making you more anxious or feeling more stumbling along the path, then get rid of them. And that is the actual teaching. So subverted expectations. Here are these rules. We're going to tell you what they are. And there certainly are some teachers in Buddhist practice, and some masters, so to speak, who get comfortable with power and authority and write books and give talks and give explanations about how we all must behave according to a certain set of standards. But the further you study Buddhism and the further you take in Buddhism as a personal and fellowship practice, the more we know that that's not something that we need to be worried about. And so why do we go with these fixed views? What's attached? Why do we get attached to fixed views? Well, it seems to me like a big piece of that is because as human beings, we like things to be certain. We like for somebody to tell us, and so we can measure. We like to measure things, even if it's us, even if we don't measure up. And we like to have this level of knowing that we're doing it the right way. And because if we don't, if we have to do it on our own, the thing that comes up for most of us is fear. Like, oh my goodness, I'm not sure I'm doing it the right way, I'm not sure whatever. And so there are some good scholars that help us with that as well. Joseph Goldstein, who was involved in insight meditation, puts it this way. When fear arises, it means we're at some edge of what we're willing to be with, what we are willing to accept. Right there is precisely the most interesting place of practice, because that is where we have set a limitation or a boundary for ourselves. If we can see that and recognize it, then that is the place to work, to look, and to explore. That is the place to be open. So that's a really good teaching, it seems to me. It gives us the opportunity to say, so if I try this on my own, if I sit as instructed because there's some guidance about how to sit, but then I make adjustments for my body, my breath, my mind, and that makes perfect sense. And it shouldn't be just a distraction from the way, there's some history, 2,500 years of practice, and there's some wisdom to be had there. But I don't think we need to get tied up in that. I think the instruction is that these are the expectations about how you practice, and you can subvert those to make the practice real for the life that you're leading. And there's huge debates going on in Buddhism right now in all the lineages about how Buddhism in America should unfold from Buddhism in Tibet or Japan or wherever it's come from. So many of us came to Buddhist practice to identify and to relieve our suffering, and those of us here in this particular fellowship, we come here rather than sitting on a zafu at home, or here includes the Zoom folks. But we do that rather than sit alone, because we believe that our practice can relieve the suffering of others in the room, and that your wisdom can relieve my suffering, and that we can do together what we can't do alone. And so when I came, I was interested in the fellowship, in being connected. I didn't want to think too much about suffering, but I was willing to have those discussions, the first noble truth, suffering, second noble truth, the reason for it. I was willing to hang in there till we got to the third noble truth. There's an end to suffering. And for me, there's the precepts and the bodhisattva vows, and there's all that good stuff. But for me, then and now, 30 years later, the end to suffering is connection. The end to suffering is being in this room with all of you. So, Cahill Gibran, the poet that many of us know, put it this way when talking about the fear, like what's blocking us from being our own version of Buddhism, our own version of fellowship, our own version of family and connection, as we will experience in the next month, as we might have some holidays or whatever. He says, it is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled from the peaks of the mountain, long and winding road crossing forests and villages, and in front of her she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear, because that's where the river will know that it's not about disappearing into the ocean, it's about becoming the ocean. And so that seems to me this practice that we have. It's an individual practice of sitting, of getting in touch with our breathing, of being willing to live in this present moment, arousing mindful awareness about, how am I living my life? Am I living according to these standards that I have for myself? And am I doing it right? And so for a lot of years in my early practice, that was a conundrum. Am I doing it right? Some of these teachings say that you must follow the teacher and follow the hierarchy. And some say there is no hierarchy in Buddhism. We do it together and we do it individually. And then I was given a gift. Someone gave me a copy of a tape where Ram Dass was reciting the Shin Sun Ming. And he says, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. Let go of longing and aversion, and it reveals itself. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Don't waste time. Don't waste time in doubt and argument. They have nothing to do with this. To live in this realization is to be without anxiety about perfection. The way is without language. So we have this opportunity to say, so I don't have to evaluate myself, and in fact I probably shouldn't. I have this opportunity to say, if it feels like it's easing my suffering, if my anxiety is going down, if my concern about the activities of life are less, if I'm more willing to ask for help and get help from folks in my fellowships and my families and so forth, then my practice seems to me to be working. And so we have these opportunities to reduce suffering. And this is a wonderful little book called Not Too Late. It's edited by Rebecca Solnit, who some of you know. It's called Changing the Climate Story from Despair to Possibility. But it's got a lot of readings in here. And this one is from Joan Halifax. She says, transforming our suffering doesn't mean that we're going to be returned to the state that we experienced before. But we can discover that suffering and loss have given us a greater ability to live in the present rather than to be constantly overwhelmed by the past. It is also helpful to remember that what we have been through can make it possible for us to be more connected with the present and can nourish wisdom and greater compassion as well as humility. So it seems to me that that's a really positive way of just saying our own experience. Even if, like as a person with addictions in my life, there's periods in my life where it's like, man, I don't have anything to teach anybody because I was 45 when I got sober. How did I waste that much of my life? And then you say, what did the Buddha say? Somebody taught me that. So I didn't waste those 45 years. I had that experience. And I did some things in the 45 years that were positive and that were kind to others and nurturing of others. But I could have taken better care of myself and then modeled that behavior for others. So I made changes and I got there. And I think that's really positive. Thich Nhat Hanh says that all of us are looking for our solid ground, our true home, a place where we feel safe, comfortable, and fulfilled, and no longer lonely. And he reminds us that the Buddha taught us that that place is inside us. There is a peaceful island where we can go back with mindful breathing and mindful walking. And it's just such a gift. And in here, in this book, there's another quote that the novelist Haruki Murakami wrote in Kafka on the Shore. And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure, in fact, whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of that storm, you won't be the same person that walked in. And that's what the storm is all about. And so there's that wonderful poster that you see sometimes on the wall that says, life isn't about avoiding the storm. Life is about learning to dance in the rain. And so I think that's what this Buddhist practice is for us, is we come with expectations of relieving suffering and a certain way to do that. And that most of us experience a relief of suffering. And we do that through connection and through sharing with each other and sharing our experiences, the positive ones and the difficult ones. And then we figure out that we were programmed to think of ourselves as anything other than beautiful, lovable, loving human beings. And that whatever anxieties or depressions or fears or whatever we have, there's a reason for those. And very often it's because people taught us that. Or very often it's because they taught us so well that we still have that filter in our brain that everything comes in. Even if you accomplish something really good at work or with your family or in your practice, it comes through the lens of, probably could have done that better. Or if only I had done this, or if only we had had 10 more people, or if only we had advertised here, if only Zoom cameras were pointed in a different direction, whatever it is. And so it's this really positive opportunity for us. Fellowship, that part of the name of this group, the fellowship, that's how we learn. We each have experiences that will benefit the other folks that are here. We sit next to each other in meditation because we get a sense of how the other person is meditating and relaxing and breathing. And we sit together in meditation because the person next to us is breathing too noisily, smells like garlic, whatever it might be. We get a chance to say, not now. Not now. We get a chance to go back to just breathe. And then it's all in context, right? So if we can do that metaphor of saying, I don't have to be bothered by the person smelling like garlic because this meditation lasts 20 minutes. and then we'll be 20 minutes more together or however long, and then we'll be gone. Says, yeah, I can survive this. My expectation is that everyone will breathe perfectly and sit perfectly, and it will be completely silent. And I wasn't here that day, but there's a wonderful story that somebody had planned to give a talk about dealing with expectations, and a mouse ran best over here. And he was not a country boy, he was a city boy. So like, he tried to give his talk after that, but he just kept waiting for that mouse to come back from wherever it was. So we have expectations about how things should go, and then we learn by taking care of each other that we have inner beauty and inner strength, that we have an innate capacity for being kind to ourselves and each other. And so I have for the last about year and a half, I've been practicing with my mantra that I've been using. It comes from the poet Hafiz. And he says, and this is how I base my practice in working with others: I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in darkness that the astonishing light of your being. I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in darkness the astonishing light of your being. And so that's my way of saying, in the work that I do, I don't need you to practice Buddhism or to be engaged in anything the way I do it. What I want to do is just to be present with you and to be a little bit of a mirror, so you can say, wow, look at how skilled you are. Look at how beautiful you are. Look at how you take care of others. And on those moments when you're feeling lonely and not connected, to say, look around, look at the Zoom and look at this room. You're disconnected. You're not lonely. You may have decided to be by yourself today, but I wish that when you're lonely or feeling down or feeling sad, if I have one gift to offer, it's simply to remind you of the brilliant light of your own life. Thank you.
Do you have time? Any comments? Anyone online?
Very good. Well, we know that there are cookies and tea. I think.
Sorry, do we have announcements?
Oh, I was posing that question. I don't know if it's the change of seasons, but all I want to do is read novels right now. I just want to, and I want to recommend Barbara Kingsolver's magnificent Demon Copperhead, which is a gloss on David Copperfield, from the view of an orphaned kid in Appalachia, and who narrates the whole thing, and it's utterly sublime and powerful. I highly recommend it. But at one point, there's a teacher recognizes that you are resilient, and he started to appreciate that he had been through an extraordinary, messed up life, even as a 11-year-old. Anyway, another one that I'm reading is Lucy by the Sea, about a woman who is rounded up by her ex-husband to flee the virus in New York, and they find a place. And she has no idea what's going to unfold. He thinks, a couple of weeks. He's a scientist, but it threw me back on, I don't really remember COVID. It was such a blur of time. And does anyone else have that? What was I doing? I don't. Anyway, but I'm not meeting expectations. So that type of uncertainty was really remarkable. And I don't think it's gotten quite enough credit about the cognitive pressures at that time. Anyway, but thank you for a wonderful talk. It's always great to have you here.
Yeah, I think that COVID was a great metaphor, because I think we didn't know what to expect. And then when it went on for a little longer and a little longer, we found ways to take care of each other and bond with each other and reach out to each other. Some people who had never been alone figured out a good way to be alone with themselves. And then they figured out that there's a difference between solitude and isolation, and not for everybody. We know the numbers and stuff, but lots of folks created fellowship. new relationship with their families, which in some cases brought them closer, and in some cases, the divorce rate went way up during that second part. It's like, I promise to love you forever, but not 24/7. That wasn't in a New York apartment. That was not the deal. But I do think it's exactly that. It's that subverted expectation. We thought, oh man, when it first started, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to get a couple weeks off work, get to stay home, blah, blah. And then as it went on, people were like, oh. So, exactly.
There's 2 people online. Clint. Yes, Clint.
Thank you. I thought it was a wonderful talk, and I really appreciate the things you said. And one thing, several points you made really stuck in my mind. One of them was, try something and it doesn't work, stop trying it, stop doing it. And about the basic common sense you get, but it just seemed to be applied whenever you talk about spiritual paths and religion. And there's one Buddhist aphorism that I really take to heart, and it's the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. And it's the idea that, we're just trying to make sense out of something that's basically you can't make sense out of. And so we make our efforts, and the efforts can be noble and they can be positive, but they're just efforts. They're not the reality. They're just our this is how I see it. It's just our attempt to get as close to the reality as our human brains will let us. And that's what I love about Buddhism as opposed to, like I said, the monotheistic religions, where it's just like, this is the one truth, and if you don't believe it, you're going to go to hell, you're a heretic, blah, blah, blah. So I just want to honor your talk today about how you reinforce that idea that, this is just us trying to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you're not saying what I'm saying, you're saying, please correct me. But it seems like you're saying, this is the best we can do, and we're trying to do it as ethically and as wisely as we can, but we're just humans, and so this is it. If it doesn't work, try something else. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so great about Buddhism as opposed to some of the other religions I've been exposed to. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. The only thing I would take out of there is we're just humans. We are humans. It's not a just. It's that's the joy of it. Is this practice is for us as we exist today, individually and in fellowship. And so the folks that were given some of the other traditions, you referenced a whole set of rules about how you have to do things. I could give a whole set of rules of how we should meditate here and how you should arouse mindful awareness and what you should do. But then you wouldn't be you as individual practitioners or individual Buddhists. You'd be me. You'd be a version of me. And so the famous saying that was controversial for a long time: if you meet a Buddha on the road, kill him. Because if the actual practitioner of the Buddha, the actual embodiment of the Buddha, would never walk around saying that I'm the one that gives you the rules. So it's that we are human, fully, vibrantly human. And so we get to and are encouraged to try it different ways, because if I can figure out a way to arouse mindful awareness that decreases my suffering, then it might be good for some other folks. And if I can't figure it out, I can look over here and there'll be some other folks that have figured it out for me. So that's
absolutely. There's a real humility in that. It's like, I don't have the answers. I don't know all how we all can behave. I have various thoughts about that. Yeah. And if they work, fine. If they don't work, fine too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much for a great talk. I really like what you said about the fact that meditation allows us to examine from a fresh perspective if our beliefs and our expectations actually align with reality. And the fact that you mentioned COVID, because initially when we just saw like the virility of the transmittability of the virus and the initial death rates, of course, we later knew those were people who had other pre-existing conditions. But just that snapshot, there were some people saying, wow, 1 to 2 billion people could die. And so it was really quite scary. And yet I have friends who are kind of still in that mindset. Like they they are still sort of locked down. They insist if anybody comes over, they meet in the backyard. Everything has to be open. It should open all windows, these sorts of things, which it may be appropriate for them. But like some of them have even had COVID and survived, done quite well. But they're still in this mindset of, it has to be a certain way. And I'm not saying that that's wrong or anyone who holds those views is, to be thought less of. But it just, so I guess my question is, what does it take? What's a good way for us to look at, do my expectations align with reality? Like some people will never do that, I think. How do we get better at doing that? So I have views that I'm not questioning, right? How do I get at those? It's like our blind spot,
Well, I think, thank you for that, Tom. I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is that there are people in life who have never actually felt safe. After years and years of therapy, I walked around and a good therapist probably said to me one day, "You behave like somebody who is living not safe in defense." And I said, "Yeah." And then we did a lot of therapy around what happened to me when I was a kid. And he said, "It's because you weren't safe. As you were growing up, you weren't safe." And so you have that set of structures and beliefs that of somebody who's never been safe. Now you can perhaps let go of some of that if you want to. And over the last 15 or 20 years, I've figured out ways to deal with that and to help other people deal with it. So the people that you're referring to, when COVID came and they could close the doors of their apartment and put on a mask and get some rubber gloves and wash the bags of their groceries as they came in, it was the first time for some people that it was like, wow, I'm in an environment now that I'm controlling and it's safe. And that felt pretty good. And so I think that folks who are making their rules for themselves about how to be safe, maybe folks who are experiencing that idea of having some creativity around making safety in their life, and it feels good. And we can choose to go to their houses and be in the backyard and maybe wear a mask if they're asking us to, or if you're going to spend the weekend with them, they ask you to take a test, a COVID test before you go. We might decide that's all too much trouble, and I'm not willing to do all that. And I would think that if they're good friends, or if they're friends who you think your presence in their life might bring them some peace and ease, a test takes 15 minutes, and a mask takes a minute. And so if maybe what they're experiencing is this first sense in life of being able to create a safety net for themselves. There could be all kinds of reasons why they didn't feel safe before. And so when I experience that in people I know, I try to recognize that and try to help make them feel safe.
Okay, great. Yeah, and what you said too about the fact that our fears are often the richest place in which we can explore our practice.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to look at it. Like, what's that about?
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay. The idea of being in the present and trying to do that is something that's always eluding me, I would say. And so, in your experiences, it's like just like being on the cushion and doing our meditation and trying to get there that way, or do you have any express practices that could get us there faster?
Yeah. One of the tools I use is a story that Thich Nhat Hanh tells, and some of you have heard me say this before, but I'll repeat it because it is the way I deal with that, which is he said that human beings have any experience 3 times. You plan it, and you spend lots of time thinking about how it's going to work and what's going to happen. Like if you're going home for the December holidays or having people at your house, you have a plan of how it's going to work, who you can sit next to each other, you got all that. And then the event happens, whatever it is, and it doesn't ever look like all that fun. And then the event is over with, and you ruminate like, oh, I shouldn't have put Uncle Jack next to Cousin Bobby, and I won't do that again next year, blah, blah, blah. And it's not my fault. They should get along with each other. They're adults. And so Thich Nhat Hanh says we have every event 3 times, and his prayer for us is, may you have each event once. May you live each event once. And so for me, I know that, I've had an anxiety disorder my whole life, so I'm always worried about what's going on. And, even coming to give a Buddhist talk, is it going to mean anything to anybody? Did it work? And then, people say, good talk, thank you, and we have a cookie and leave. And then I'm riding home, I'm usually thinking, oh, was he just being nice to do it? So it happens to all of us, but I try to think of Thich Nhat Hanh just saying, my prayer for you is have each event once. And so it's just a way for me to pull myself back into, okay, calm down, girl. You don't need to be going there or there. Just try and stay here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think we're out of time. Thank you all. Thank you, Steve. And an extra thank you to Cass and Prisha and Marcus for helping set up everything today so that all these folks on Zoom could be here with us. Thank you to everyone on Zoom for sharing. We have a host today.
Yes, I'm the host. Excuse me. Please stay and enjoy the company of the Sangha. There are refreshments and hot water for tea. There are treats out there. If you use a cup, please wash it. Or you put it in the sink, I'll take care of it. I'll be going around with a Dharma bowl to accept contributions to cover our expenses. Your generosity is appreciated. Donations in the range of $10 to $20 help us meet our expenses. For example, honorings for our speakers, rent for this beautiful center, and we send out a quarterly newsletter mailed mostly to people in prison. There's a newcomer sign-up sheet on the credenza if you wish to receive a membership directory. And at 12:30 at the door, people go out for lunch, and anyone is welcome. Okay, that's announcement 1. Second one, Dave Rico, who has spoken here before, he's going to have a workshop next Saturday, December 9th, The Power of Love, and of course, relating without retaliating, like Christmas dinner. It'll be a full day. There's flyers on the credenza. Announcement 3. It's our annual fundraising time. If you haven't received a letter, there's letter copies on the credenza and tells where our money goes to and tells what we've done in the past year. So take one if you'd like. Now announcement 4.
Anyone else?
Announcement 4. One of the Zoom people who help us set up is stepping back from that role, and so we could use another person to, once a month or so, help set up the Zoom equipment in the morning. It's just a matter of getting here a little early in the day, and a little earlier, like 20 minutes or half an hour earlier, and then putting the equipment away afterwards. So it's not onerous, but it's really necessary to spread the duties around.
Thank you. Anyone else? Our speaker next week is Eugene Cash. I'm sure many of you know him, he's been here before. But in case you don't, Eugene Cash is the founding teacher of the San Francisco Insight Meditation Community of San Francisco. He teaches at Spirit Rock Meditation Center and leads intensive meditation retreats internationally. His teaching is influenced by both Buddhist, Burmese, and Thai streams of the Theravada tradition, as well as Zen and Tibetan Buddhist practice. He's also a teacher of the Diamond Approach, a school of spiritual investigation and self-realization, developed by A.H. Almas. And if that's all, we'll gather together for the dedication of Eric. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.